everybody. Okay. Oh my gosh. I hope everyone's refreshed and had a good break, and welcome back. I too had a break, so it's nice. I got everyone here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I see our city attorney in person. No baseball bats behind you. Right, and the city administrator. Anyone online? Are we expecting? Okay. And we have an audience. Welcome, audience. So, all right. Let's start up. So we're going to try to talk through the local building code efficiency standards first. I think, Nick, you're going to do this. I would just add one thing, which was when I was kind of looking at this, I was saying, gosh, it would be really nice if we had a roadmap, on how the state's going to get to their 50% and their 100%. And then I had a conversation with Sergey, the head of the CAC, after that, saying, gosh, have you seen a roadmap anywhere? I'd really like to know. And I've been poking around, and I can't find anything. And then in December, state put out a roadmap, which was very cool. And I haven't read the whole thing, but I think we forwarded it to everyone. And I think it gives us something to work with in terms of, here are the scientists saying, here are the things we can do when. And it's, pretty high level. But my 2 cents was it kind of told us the areas that we could look at to do things sooner, and maybe the areas that, while we want to be sooner than the state, we don't want to do right away. And I was very excited by that and just wanted to forward it. I don't know, Nick, whether it's reflected at all in, your stuff, but I just wanted to introduce that and encourage everyone to take a look. And then, Nick, you're on.
No, thank you, Mayor, and I think that's a good place to start. So in the packet is Chapter 12 from the New York State Climate Plan pertaining to buildings. The actual plan itself is a document that is chock full of information, over 400 pages, a lot to digest, but it's more than just a policy piece and more than just aspirational, and it's well documented. If you read the chapter on buildings, you'll see that it looks into the science. It talks about the practicality of actually having technology that is able to meet the zero net emission goals. It's a good document. It lays out a nice roadmap. And it's also somewhat consistent with the conversations we've had with state officials. When we first discussed this issue, when Dan a couple of years ago raised it with me and we started researching it, there were questions about not just the technology, but also the legality of it. Can you do it? Because it is regulated by a number of different legislative regimes, whether it's the federal emissions on clean air, whether it's the state legislation of utilities, or it's the state building code. And so the law is starting to catch up. It's not quite all the way there yet. New York State did introduce the All Electrified Building Act. That was part of the governor's budget bill last year, did not get passed. It really remained in committees. It's now being reintroduced as a Senate bill. I've sent that to the council just this evening if you've not had a chance to look at it. Basically the same legislation, but the dates are a little changed. The dates are different than what's in the Climate Action Council plan. But what we've found with our research is there's really 2 areas of the law that support the local municipalities regulating the energy source for buildings. And you've seen that in our prior memo, and we've discussed it, but really it arises out of the New York State Energy Code that allows the municipality to preempt state law and have higher standards. And also, in my opinion, the constitutional amendment, the Green Amendment, that guarantees the rights of the residents of New York State to have a clean and healthy environment. And I believe that gives you the authority as well. No one has looked at it from that angle, but I think it's supported, and I think if Beacon were to include that in your legislative intents and purpose, you would be striking on new ground there. There have only been so far 2 cases interpreting the Green Amendment that I believe also bolsters the support and the intent here. And as you know, with natural gas and fossil fuels, especially with natural gas, there's studies out there talk about indoor air quality as well as the effect on outdoor air and just fossil fuels in general. So now that we've established the legislative authority exists, the question is how do you want to go with that, and what are the areas that we want to look at? We have had some preliminary discussions with your building inspector, Bruce Flowers, and Bruce is in support of the law, is going to be speaking to some builders, because what we want to do is make sure that the law is understandable by the regulated community, implementable, and enforceable. And that was our concern with the New York City law that regulated air emissions, that we felt it was preempted by the Federal Clean Air Act that looks at air emissions. The Ithaca law is very comprehensive, very detailed if you ever get a chance to read it. But you need to have a cup of coffee in one hand and a shot of whiskey in the other to go through and read it and spend the time with it. And that, in our mind, is not what we would recommend, because that has a point system. It also doesn't fully take effect until 2026. They also have some voluntary parts that talked about retrofitting. They have a lot of investor money through some private programs, a much different, unique animal in both the city of Ithaca and the town of Ithaca, two separate municipalities. We think the easiest way to regulate this is the simple statement that thou shalt not use fossil fuels as a source of energy for buildings, and build from it there. Keep it very simple, very straightforward, so that the building inspector can enforce it. And similar to New York State, we think a phased approach, one that deals with residential first and then commercial phased in, because there are questions for larger entities. New York City, for example, has an exemption for commercial water heaters because they don't think the technology is there. While it's there for a single-family home or for 3 or 4 apartments, to have a hot water heater that is non-natural gas fired and is done by electricity, they don't think it's there for the larger apartment buildings. I haven't done enough digging to know whether it's, what's that cutoff limit? Is it 100 apartment? Is it 25? But that's something that I think the state is looking at as well, and that's why he sees in the state's program a phased-in approach. And so we're prepared to come back at your next work session with a draft local law in 2 weeks, and we just need some guidance from you as to some of the questions that we've laid out in our memorandum to you. And so we did sort of a decision tree, and you may have other questions and thoughts that you want to speak through, but I think this gives us, now that we know we can do it, and I know that the council wants to do it, what is it we want to do? And what type of really construction is being regulated. So if you turn to page 2 of the memo, one of the questions we have, the first question is, what type of construction should the local law regulate? And I know some of these are pretty basic and you've discussed it, but I think it's good just to get down here. This is the direction you want to go in. And so in question 1, residential construction, I presume you want to regulate single-family, two-family, multi-family, and condominium and townhouses. And then, if that's correct, we've also then broken down commercial construction to start in a later phase, and we can talk about what year. But the first question we need answered is the council comfortable with this breakdown that we're regulating it residential on the one hand and then commercial in a separate bucket?
Yeah, so this is one where I was reading that chapter from the state's roadmap, and their first milestone is 2020, you've got it in your memo, 2025 for new residential construction, 3 stories and under. And it's like, I was saying to George, I wasn't sure why the taller ones, versus the shorter ones, but obviously they thought about it. That's pretty close to us, right? I mean, okay, we've got 4 stories maybe sometimes, but it would seem to me that we could probably do all residential. I don't know if a condo would be considered, because it's not the ownership of the ownership structure, it's what's the building
Sure,
look like.
if you say all residential dwelling units.
Yeah, and so maybe we'd have to think about that. But my first reaction was this was the target area, and it's confirmed by the state's roadmap. Right, we could do it soon because they said 2025, and I don't think it's crazy for us to go a couple years early.
No, and the reason the state, I believe the reason the state has pushed it back, and speaking with NYSERDA, speaking with other municipal agencies and officials, is they just don't have the regulations in place. And in fact, NYSERDA has been working with some municipalities in trying to develop that proposed legislation, and that's not even proposed to be introduced until the end of this year. So I think Beacon is coming out ahead of this, and in fact, your law might become the model for other municipalities ahead of the states. Okay. So depending when you want to have it effective, that's certainly up to you. I think from speaking with Bruce, the technology is there. Builders are looking at residential.
Yeah, I think my interest in the delay initially was, as I might have told you, that we want the contractors to get up to speed. Is Bruce feeling like that the local contractors are getting up to speed? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, but Bruce feels that they're aware of it, they're all designing towards that way, and they're constructing that way, yes. He was comfortable with the technology is here and the builders are there,
I see.
yes.
Okay. Just quick about the timing that you have in the memo, Nick. For commercial construction where you said phased in starting in 2028,
Yes.
that's your recommendation, or that's what the current state?
That is from the state. The state
Got
is
it, okay.
2025 residential, commercial 2028, yes.
And the other thing I didn't understand, and I haven't done a full reading, I admit it, it's like whatever, 400 pages, I didn't read it all, I'm just being honest. But I did do a pretty good read of this chapter. I wasn't sure, how did the stretch building code that we already adopted, how does that fit in here? And are they in effect going to put out another one with residential, and we're just adopting it earlier, or what is it? How does that work?
Sure, so there's actually two other laws that are coming down the pike. One is a stretch 2023 that will build upon the stretch 2020 or 2021 that the city adopted. And that doesn't deal with so much the energy source. It talks about the building envelope, making it tighter, the requirements on appliances, requirements on windows. It's more the infrastructure of the building itself, not the source of the energy. So that third law I talk about, with stretch 2020 being the first, stretch 2023 being the second, is the Electrification Act that is being worked on as a local law, because all the state is going to do is, should the state adopt this year or next year a requirement that buildings be electric, they're directing the Codes Council to then develop regulations. So the state law doesn't actually implement it, it just gives direction to the New York State Building Department to now design and develop regulations that would eliminate fossil fuels. And then they have to develop and design and adopt their law and then go through changes, so it will be a number of years, I think, and that's why the state has set 2025 as a residential goal. So the Stretch Energy Code is in addition to, it's another layer of energy conservation.
One thing also about the stretch code is it has, the one that we adopted in 2020 included some stuff that was related to setting up pipes and stuff throughout the building for eventual electrification. So there was, for multi-family buildings, there was a requirement for having electric charging stations, I think at 2 or a certain percentage of the parking stations, but then like another 10 of them had to be outfitted so that wires could be run to them. So there's like...
Yeah, because I saw bits and pieces of like even how much pipe you could have from a source to an outlet and things like that in there. I'm not sure how it all works. I don't want us to get into the details as much as doing kind of broad strokes where we're
Yes.
going, right? Because I think we lead if we're smart, and if we keep it simple. I think you described it as just implementable, right? Yeah.
Right.
If we're moving ahead of this before the state, at least with the residential aspect of it, should we also consider phasing in the commercial aspect of it before the state as well?
I think that's something for the council to discuss, yes, because the state is at 2028. From what my initial understanding is, the technology is not there or not fully understandable, so it's still being looked at. So I think it does make sense to phase it. And the good thing about doing it as a local law is you always have the ability to change it, right? If you're going to set it as 2026, 27, 28, 29, 30, 33, you can change it in 2025 to match a reality that now exists. And what's nice about phasing and putting a date on there is you're sending a message to the regulated community that this is coming down the pike, so be prepared for it. And you have the flexibility to come back and change it to reflect reality.
And Nick, the 2025 for residential and 2028 for commercial
Yes.
is a proposal. It still needs to be codified in law, correct?
It does, that's correct, yes.
Okay.
What would we, oh, sorry, George.
If we separate commercial from residential, I would think that having the mixed use, which is typically probably 75% residential, would flip it into the residential part of it, as opposed to it being separate, because anything that's going to go up on Main Street is going to have a commercial entity on the ground floor everything else above it is going to be residential, so,
Or office, potentially.
or office, yeah, but I think we should
Move mixed use
consider
into,
the residential. Yeah.
Yeah, that was, you couldn't tell, because when you read that one chapter, it divides the world, as if it's clean between residential and commercial, and clearly, we're the exact opposite, right, as George says. Probably all of our commercial is going to be, partially residential. So I think we'd have to figure out how to do that.
and maybe,
The other thought is, by the way, if, whether it's like, maybe we could adopt things a couple years earlier, which is what Justice is saying, for along their path, is we might be able to get someone from the council to come down and talk to us, too.
NYSERDA would enjoy that opportunity to come down here and explain this. Oh, and from the Climate Council, yes.
Yeah, because now that someone's done the work, that means someone's kind of thought it through and probably wants to share lots of information.
And I think they also want to receive feedback, because a lot of times, right, the councils are not the boots on the ground. They don't have the practical experience. It's a broad cross-section, so I don't want to say they don't have the experience, but I think hearing from local officials is of interest to them as well. And I think for the mixed use, it may be a situation where you require that the residential be electric, but if there's a brewery on the bottom floor where it's not feasible yet to do so, you would have an exemption or some way to allow for that commercial use to still operate and not be electrified, if that's the case.
In New York City, restaurants were exempt, is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
I think we could move mixed use from the commercial side to the residential side without going through a whole rigmarole, especially since this is for new buildings, right?
Yes.
So I don't think it would have any immediate distressing impact.
The only, sorry.
I just wanted to ask, do you think that the commercial needs a full 3 extra years on top of what we have for residential?
So there, I'm not comfortable offering an opinion. I know the state does. I'd want to speak with Bruce, and that's why I was going to respond to Justice's comment about moving the mixed use. I think it makes sense. I understand why. I think you might want to have a relief valve, if you will. I don't know if restaurants, if all types, I know there are concerns. I don't know enough to know whether restaurants and other light industrial type uses that you might find, whether it's a brewery or distillery, would be able to operate with a fully electric. And I think having conversations with Bruce would help answer those questions.
Yeah, I could also see a path, and you have a whole category about a hardship process, and so I'm wondering if some commercial, we say, maybe we do offer exemptions to other commercial, we say you have to come to us and have some proof, but I'd like to hear from Bruce how sustainable and feasible that actually is as a path forward, because I would like to think as much as possible we do earlier, but I want to learn more about how commercial actually works and the different variations before I make a call on that.
Right, and maybe we can get someone from NYSERDA or from a Climate Action Council to give us some information on that. And also, by introducing the local law and holding a public hearing, you may get comments from regulated communities as to their feedback as to whether this is not realistic or how realistic it is.
So I certainly have no expertise in building anything. I just want to make absolutely clear, so that I am incapable of making a statement like, mixed use, they'll do electric in the residential part, and it's like, I can't make that statement, because it could be that, you're putting in 2 systems all of a sudden, and that's just not feasible. I'm pretty comfortable that first piece, the residential standalone, and I'd like to learn more about how we treat that commercial. And, maybe what we say is that the residential portion of mixed use should be, but then we leave room for some sort of, or we have to go learn enough to know what do we want to do in that area, because I just have no basis of assessing this, right?
I do know from conversations I've had with Edgewater that they have a mixed heating use. It doesn't involve, they didn't talk about hot water, so I can't speak to that, but for their apartments, it's electric heat. And then for their larger common spaces, it is gas-fed heat. And I know other buildings too, in Kingston, who do the same thing that are those are actually repurposed. And so I do think the technology is there, but like you, I'm not a building expert, so I would want confirmation
like
that that's
Bruce
possible.
Or somebody to give us some sense, or the council to come in, someone from there, and because they must have done research on mixed-use buildings, and so learning from them would be really helpful, right?
Might even be worth asking the developer from Edgewater or something to come in and actually speak of real life experience.
Yep. And I think what would be helpful is if we actually had a law put together that would also allow the Climate Action Council and NYSERDA and builders to comment on that as well. So if we bring them, sort of have something for them to respond to and answer these questions, and we can certainly leave placeholders on issues where we're looking for further guidance and thoughts.
There's another, there's a restaurant in the Catskills. I have them here. I've never been there. Seminary Hill Catskills. Apparently, they switched their entire kitchen from gas to induction stoves. Had to make some adjustments to their menu accordingly because there's no open flame. But they're very happy, and it's gone very smoothly. And I've planned on reaching out to them to learn more about what they've done, but I can share that with the council or even invite them to speak to us.
Sure.
What the experience is like for a restaurant to change over.
Right, no, that'd be good information to get. Thank you. So then I think I have enough guidance there. And the second question is, we talk about new construction, which is assuming it's vacant and you're building from the ground up. Well, what about major renovations or an addition, which is in addition to new construction? So would you consider a renovation? For example, if it's, you have an existing single-family house and they're adding on, 2,000 square feet, is that something where you would want it to be considered, to be required, but you can go for an exemption, to be discussed with the building inspector? How would you want to carve out and make a distinction for additional something beyond new construction? And I don't think the difference, there's really three categories, right? New construction, additions and renovations, and then retrofitting, where there's no change and you're just requiring people to come in and change their equipment and appliances. I've not seen municipalities start there. I think that's a difficult place to start, especially now. So I don't think we're talking about retrofitting, but that in-between category that I wanted to bring to your attention was the major renovations and what your thoughts are on that, which is either tell us to look at it a bit more and come back with suggestions, or not for this first phase and let's just introduce this.
Did you get a definition of a major, is there any established definition of a major renovation?
Not in the building code. We have some examples here that we pulled. I think it's from Ithaca. Work is less than 75% of the floor, or 75% or more of the floor area was considered to be a major renovation.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I would defer to Bruce on that because I think each community is different. 75% of a community where they have larger buildings like New York City versus Beacon where buildings are smaller,
Yeah.
75% might be just still not realistic.
I mean, I'm definitely interested in including major renovations, but in a smart way, I mean, even if you took the 75% rule, if you did the 75% that doesn't have any of your appliances, and then we said, oh, but you have to, because you did 75% of your building, you have to replace the appliances in the other 25%. It might not, like if I'm renovating the garage and I make you replace your hot water heater in the basement, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Well, so that's actually one of the questions is about when you discuss major renovations, do you include unheated space? Ithaca, for example, excludes unheated space like a basement, an attic, or a garage addition because it shouldn't really be used as a penalty.
Did Bruce have anything to say about this?
No, he wanted more time. He wanted to speak to some builders. We were working with him on some other issues that were pressing. So this did not get full attention yet. We just had preliminary discussions.
Yeah, this is the area that worries me, right? Because we're making a judgment call that we have no idea. And even if we rely on someone like the building inspector, we don't know whether that applies in all cases, right? And then we can say, oh, we'll do, hardships or exceptions, and it's just getting complicated. When I read the chapter in the state's roadmap, they didn't talk about renovation. They talked about end of useful life for the appliances. And I think that might be a better approach, because what it would say is, I'm doing my garage, I just did my gas, you don't want me to replace, I just did my boiler or whatever, you don't want me to replace that. But if we did a kind of a useful life concept, which is, the state is saying they wouldn't get to, I think, residential heat until 2030.
Yes. Yeah.
That one, we can put it off for a while, just because, we're not there. But the other one is we might think about useful life concepts, so that, even though I'm doing a major renovation, the new things that are there aren't wasted, right?
And what we could also do is develop in the law sort of a requirement that if you're coming in for major renovation, what do we do? But we use it to gather information that the building inspector shall discuss and consider, and the applicant shall explain, did they consider electrification, and why or why not. So it's not a requirement, but you use it as an opportunity to get information, and then you can revisit it in a year.
Can you also limit the electrification just to the part of the property that's being renovated?
You could, yes. Yes, right, because you don't want to do the retrofitting, and that could become impossible in a historic building or difficult. Right.
But it may not make sense if you already have a heating and hot water system, you know,
Right.
to say we're going to have a different hot water system.
Yeah, but.
I mean, where this makes sense, like, I'm trying to think about actual things that are coming up, and like Tompkins Terrace wants to retrofit all of their apartments. This would be great to talk to them about trying to move to electric wherever they can, because they're coming to you in a week or two to talk about a pilot. But you think about like a major renovation as like a gut rehab or rebuilding from a fire more than just an addition.
You know,
Yeah.
one way to limit the cost is, I mean, we're kind of saying it already, but to only replace the appliances when they when they would have been replaced already. And that may not be end of life. It definitely is end of life, but it could also include, we know that we're 15 years into this hot water tank and we want to replace it. Then they could replace it with electric. Like if there was already going to be an appliance replacement, that may be, but I don't know how we write that into law.
Yeah. Well,
And you'd have to permit those. Like, I don't believe your hot water heater goes today. There's no permit required from the city. So we wouldn't
Is there
even
for
know.
electric?
No.
No.
For what?
Is there any current building permit requirement for any of that, like internal electric work?
Oh, yeah.
Just for new, but like if your hot water heater leaked and you went and replaced it,
Yeah.
I don't think you,
But if I rewired a room in my house,
Wiring.
Yes, you would, yeah.
then I
Wire-
would need a permit.
Yeah.
So there
Yeah.
might
There's a
be some
permit.
building permit things that could then trigger
But if-
something.
Yeah, but, right, if you need to change your washing machine or your dishwasher or your...
I just go ahead and do that.
That's right, yeah.
or your boiler goes, you know?
Well, that's the other thing that we have to think through. I mean, all right, so we've been in our house for 30 years. We put in a boiler early on. The steam radiators have lasted 140 years. They're probably going to last for another 500 years, right? We had our boiler fail in the dead of winter last year, so there's another one in there now. So what piece of the puzzle, right? I mean, if we're going to replace a boiler, what are you going to do, pull out all the radiators? And I don't know if there is such a thing as a steam electric boiler.
I actually looked into this for you. Yeah.
Yeah. But are you going to require the whole thing to be replaced, or you got to find that thing? And then you have to get the incentives, because that's where I think you were starting to go, which is, well, what if it's not of its useful life? If the incentive structure for the state is in
Right.
place, which the chapter says they
Right.
need to do, then we might be able to kind of, move things more quickly, because I think the state recognizes that incentives are going to be required for existing structures, and it'll be a big part of the puzzle.
And I think that's why low-income housing is, one of the exemptions to talk about, because I believe that they're not required in New York City because there are those incentives in place. And the profit margins are narrow, and it's expensive to do.
So
It's not going to affect a lot of our buildings, but I don't know if Tompkins Terrace would push over or not. Yeah.
So we included this discussion about major renovations, and I think it also establishes and proves the point that it could actually become a distraction to your main goal. And so maybe the first phase is we don't do the major renovations until we get some more information, unless we hear from NYSERDA. But I don't want to have Bruce bogged down as he's enforcing other laws, then trying to figure out the major renovations issue. And you have perhaps a regulated community who might be concerned as well. So we want a law that is easily understood and implementable, and I think looking at major renovations is a good discussion to have, but I probably would recommend against regulating at this point. 6 months from now, if our opinion changes, we go in there and we amend it.
Right. We don't have to have a single law to do every single piece, right? We can do a series of laws.
Absolutely, yes.
I would actually push to continue to include major renovations, but I do see the reasons why keeping it narrow makes sense. As we discussed, the purpose of this law is to stop the use, to regulate the sources of energy. And so if there are instances in which a major renovation is happening and somebody is including in their major renovation a rehauling of that underlying infrastructure, I do want this law to apply to them. There are instances that we have been discussing where things get a little murkier about which appliance exactly is being replaced or not, or is at the end of its useful life. But I would like that framework built into the law, and we can phase in how restrictive we are on that over time.
I agree. I do like continuing the conversation to include renovations, though I don't have the right definitions or I don't have the answer. Maybe nobody at the table does right now. Like Paloma said, we want to regulate the burning of gases inside buildings, and I'm thinking about, I'm just taking this as an example because it's a prominent example in my ward, is 1 East Main. When 1 East Main was converted into apartments, if we left out major renovations, that whole building could have been set up to be burning gas in every unit while we were trying to electrify all new buildings. And yes, 1 East Main was a renovation, but really, for its use and such, it's a new building, right? It is the skeleton of the old one. So why would we want fossil fuels to continue to be burnt inside that building, but not one that with the same exact specs next door that was built from the ground up?
Yeah. So let me continue the discussion with Bruce, because I think we may be able to come up with, because that's a good example, right? A total re-gut job, a rehab of that nature is something you want to capture, as opposed to someone adding, a 500 square foot kitchen, where we're really not changing much of the house.
It might involve a change of C of O, like the 1 East Main would have triggered a change of certificate of occupancy. Renovating a kitchen or building even an addition may not significantly
Right.
alter the C of O.
Yeah, but I think that's a fair point, which is when the rehab is 100%, it's an easier argument, right? Where we were struggling was, 75, 60, what does that mean? What am I measuring? If you know it is a total gut rehab, that might be something we could say, maybe we can include that in the first phase cleanly, right? And say, it has to be total, right? Because if we can kind of defend that credibly, I think that might work, although we kind of need to know a little bit more, because it is much harder to do rehab or total, rehab than it is to do new construction. So it could be as well that, the pipes are in the wrong place, or the building is structured incorrectly, and
Right.
you can't do it. I don't know. We might have to leave some room for that. But I buy the 100% argument. That might be right. Right?
Does the building department think in percentages the way we're talking about it?
No.
Okay, I didn't think so.
Right? That's
All
why
right.
it's I don't think it works.
Yeah, because
No,
if I
we-
were a developer, I'd be like, no, I didn't do this corner of the building, it's 99%.
We do have thresholds in our code for sprinkler installations. So if you go above a threshold, I believe it's 50%, you have to sprinkler the building. And that came up with the SROs that we've been dealing with renovations on. Their original permit didn't have 50% renovation. Then they gutted more than 50%, and we made them put a sprinkler system in. So we can think like that. It's clearly done elsewhere.
Thanks.
Okay,
And-
so, sorry.
Oh, I just do want to say out loud that part of why I think it's really important that we include the renovation framework, and we can continue to talk about the particulars, is that Beacon is largely built out, and we want to make sure that this is actually applicable to as many people as we want to actually have the outcomes that we need.
Good point, good. So I have enough direction, so we'll continue exploring that and see if we can develop a workable framework. 3, I think we've really discussed it's really included a major renovation about not including heated
I
space.
do have a question, though, just in general, in unheated spaces, are there any other uses for gas appliances in those, like a garage? I wouldn't know. Do people have gas appliances in the garages or porches or anything like that?
Generally not. It's a fair question. I'll ask Bruce, but
Okay.
So you mean uses other than heating and cooling?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I believe there's 4 or 5 things that, gas does, at least in a residential setting, right? Its main thing is for heat, right? Probably 90% of the usage is for heat.
Right.
In my house, it's more than 90%. And then cooking, dryer, hot water, and then also like a fireplace, so ornamental.
Right.
I think those are them. I don't think there are others.
So you might have a dryer in a garage, just because that's how the house was set up, and you might have running hot water. I mean, that's a little rare, but that probably comes from the main house, too.
Maybe there's no reason for cutting out the unheated spaces if there's,
Only reason would be if you were doing, including major renovations and additions, then it would be potentially burdensome if someone's putting just a garage and you include it.
I see.
We can probably come up with a way to work through
Yeah,
that.
maybe as we continue the renovation question, we can come back to this one too.
Yeah, absolutely, I think it is absolutely tied in with renovations, yes. Because, right, if someone's putting a garage and it's not heated, you don't want that to then be counting, it would not necessarily be fair to count that as part of 100% renovation or something of that nature. But if they have other gas uses within that, I think you want to capture it. So in question 4, it's, do you want to include any exemptions? And if so, which ones? And so one of the ones which is the emergency backup power, so if someone has a generator. And then we have these other lists, which are all commercial uses. So I think I don't know if we need those if you're having a phased out program. If you decide to say you want to start now, then I think you probably would want these. We do have one municipal water and wastewater facilities. That's just a practical reality that, from speaking with Chris and understanding of the operations, that your wastewater and water facilities are such a large energy demand that having that electric wouldn't work.
Yeah, the way I would think about this category is, as we talk about number 5, what the sort of hardship appeal process might be, I would err on the side of only including categories that we are 100% sure would qualify for the hardship exemption, which we will then discuss what exactly that means in a minute. But for that reason, I would not necessarily include low-income housing, potentially laundromats, potentially buildings greater than 3 stories, and err on the side of being conservative about what we automatically exempt. And then have a really clear process for the appeals.
Well, most of these look like commercial, when I thought what we were going to try to focus on first was residential.
Correct, yes.
Right? And so if that were the case, then the only things you'd need to worry about are emergency backup, and then 5 and 6, low-income housing, and then residential buildings greater than 3 stories. And historic ones, right?
Yep, that's correct. If you break-
Crematoriums would be out,
Right,
right? Just deal with them later.
correct. If you break it into residential and commercial, that's correct.
Right, which is consistent where the state's roadmap is, right? Which is
So-
pick these up first.
Yes.
Are you proposing that we don't include the commercial in this law?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
No, what I got reading the state's roadmap was there's a logic to it, and if we think we want to do something well ahead of where the state is, right? Residential's 2025. I don't think 2023 is too early. I think that's very consistent with a stretch code concept. If we want to do something that's out in 2035, and that included, for instance, end-of-life residential
Appliances.
water heat, not all of them, right? Heat was first.
Right.
But other appliances were 10 years out from now. I'm not sure why we would want to do that, and I don't see how we would have the justification, right? Because here's a bunch of scientists for the state saying, you do it 10 years from now, we're going to do it 12 years ahead of time. I'm just not seeing how we could do that. If we want to bring in the experts and kind of learn, and they said, oh yeah, you could do it now, I'd be fine. But I don't see how we have anything to support that. So,
I guess I'm not seeing the reason to postpone commercial still.
So you're thinking, Dan, just as we might consider doing residential, requiring it this year, 2023, we could also do that for if not all, then at least some chunk of commercial.
Well, I hadn't given much thought to it because I thought we were keeping residential and commercial in the law and that we would be able to discuss those dates later. But I don't see any reason like, why should some businesses be allowed to burn fossil fuels and not others?
Well, the state has clearly made a distinction for scientific reasons, right? I mean, if we want to do that, we should ban gas grills and we should ban lighters, right? I mean, just come on, right? I mean, I'm not trying to raise extremes as much as to say there's a logic to what you do in what order, and the state has laid it out. And unless you've got science saying, you know, that here's why you can, you're basically doing a cost-benefit imposition on people without having any cost-benefit evidence. I mean, I just don't see how you can do that unless you're into imposing whatever you want on people. I just don't think it's logical.
But isn't the
we
state
also-
Climate
phasing
change
it
is
in?
imposing, I mean, the climate's changing. That's what's imposing the urgency on all of us.
So why isn't the state's roadmap do it all tomorrow?
Good question.
Okay?
Well, the technology's not there, the feasibility of it and regulations are not there.
Right, which is what I want an expert to tell us,
Right.
why they put out that roadmap in that order.
We do have some businesses that I don't know that could go all electric. You have glass blowing shops, and I don't know that they can get the temperatures that they need to do that. You have welding shops that are using, very concentrated fossil fuels. We think about niche modern making all those, the glass lighting fixtures and stuff.
But they're not new.
No, I'm
But also-
but
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, okay, let's talk about niche modern. They have facilities there. They have a couple buildings that are pretty much empty. And let's say they were going to do glass blowing and the preparation isn't there. I'm not saying you don't get there, but you got to do a lot more work than just talking amongst the 9 of us to figure
I
out
feel
what processes can't be replaced. I know if you told the DPW that we can't do welding, unless we did it all electric, that might create an issue.
I feel confused because I thought that when we started this conversation, we talked about phasing in the commercial sort of in step with how the state was phasing in. And Justice asked a question, then if we're going ahead and starting a couple of years earlier, then would we then go ahead and start a couple of years earlier with the commercial? So I kind of thought we already had that conversation, that we were doing both residential and commercial. Residential now, commercial a couple of years later, just like the state. But now we're back. So I guess I'm trying to.
Yeah, I'm okay with that statement.
That's you're okay with, but you're not.
You
You want to do them both at the same time.
I'd like to put everything on the books now.
With it being implemented at the same time, I think is the key question.
Right, and I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah,
but-
where I got a little murky also was when we were talking about the mixed-use buildings,
Right.
which is a significant portion of our commercial properties. And I just wanted to say like a little bit like the other side of what you're pointing out, Chris, which I do agree with. We do have plenty of light industry uses that could not go electric necessarily. We also have commercial spaces who could. We have, bookshops and office spaces that do not require huge amounts of energy. And so I would like to err on the side, again, similar to the major renovations, including it in the law, and then shipping out reasonable exemptions from there, as opposed to excluding it completely when there are spaces that that can do this and should.
Right, so then an exemption for a commercial food establishment, if the council were in agreement, might fit that category, whereas a bookseller would be within a mixed use and required.
But typical construction isn't for, look at all the buildings that went up on Main Street.
Right.
You can say, I'm going to put residential up top, but you don't know who's coming in
Know
down
who
below.
your tenant is, right?
Right? You don't know if it's a restaurant or a bank. And so I don't, this is an area where I'm okay with where, Ren, you were going, which is we could talk about phasing in terms of timing and do that now. I think that we're not going to know enough about the commercial to make any kind of judgment calls on how we do it. So maybe what we do is we say, look, we're going to do commercial 2 years ahead of wherever the states is, right? And we could do that now, without defining how it is yet. And look to the state to help us learn what we want to do and tell them where we're going. We want to go a couple years earlier. You need to give us enough so we can make this work, right? And I think we can do that on residential, new construction under 3 stories pretty like now, maybe. I just don't know if we know enough. And so rather than us trying to legislate what we don't know, put a date out there and then go find it.
And I think specifically what we referenced that we don't know with regards to commercial is whether or not the appliances are there, that the commercial owners can, if the technology is there for their appliances. I think that was the open question that Nick you brought up.
Right, correct,
earlier.
we don't know. And what we have in the exemptions, maybe we can talk about the ones that are applicable to residential uses first. And those are, I don't hear an objection to number 1, emergency backup power. Low-income housing,
I'm with Paloma that I would like to not necessarily exempt all of them. Maybe some of them can afford it, like the case that Chris mentioned, but I would prefer to have one-on-one conversations. I don't know if the federal property, if they ever did stuff, if they could afford it or not. They have a different financial structure, so they might be exempt from a lot of our laws anyway, but I think that, yeah, I would maybe want to get to the 5th one, a hardship process for low-income housing.
For low-income housing, though, I mean, if we leave fossil fuel burning appliances in the houses, what we're saying is that people who live in low-income housing, that dirty air is okay.
Well, but the hardship process is if they're saying, we will not be able to build this if you require this, then our decision as a council is, do we give up that low-income housing because we don't want it to be built right now with fossil fuels? And that might be a decision we make, but I feel like that's where this process number 5 gets triggered. So I would rather say exactly what you're saying. We're saying, no, you have to go all electric, but maybe leave the door open for if they can't do it, then we discuss whether or not we're willing to give them a hardship exception at that point.
I would very much like to hear from a low-income housing developer on that question.
Yeah.
And a
I mean-
low-income housing resident,
Yeah.
since we're talking about leaving there.
I'm going to say that I agree with Dan on this because this is actually when I was going through this, I was thinking the same thing, but also in the long term, doesn't going all electric save money for the building? And wouldn't that have a more financial benefit to low-income housing if it was built with electric? I mean, we've had a lot of people come to us and talk to us about the benefits of moving toward an all-electric beacon, but one of them was the financial aspects of it.
I don't think it's necessarily.
Hey, George, you're not being heard on
Sorry, I
your,
don't think it's necessarily cheaper to heat your house or cook with electric until the technology can catch up to that. But typically, historically, electric has cost more than natural gas or anything else. It's the quality of life that improves. But
right. But I agree, I think that's right from what I've read as well, my understanding.
Yeah.
Well, people who live in low-income housing deserve a good quality of life as well, and I do want to keep that in mind.
One thing about cost, too, is I did read that, a builder told me that by not having any gas appliances in the building, that the ventilation requirements are lesser, and I don't know what the cost of the ventilation requirements are, but when you're not putting gas-burning appliances in a building, like before that was even a thing, the ventilation requirements were less.
Yeah.
And I think there's a law specifically about where the boiler is. It has to have like 3 windows on
Yes,
the
or fresh air
ventilation.
vents.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so none of that would be required if you had just had a heat pump.
As Chris said, we conveniently have some coming next week who's going to
Yeah.
retrofit
Yeah.
one of our, or is hoping to retrofit one of our biggest
Yeah, this-
low-income things. He's not the building expert in the impression I get. He's more the finance and project manager person, but there might be questions we can pose to him that I'm sure he would be happy to try to find the answers out for some of this stuff.
So let's put this in the category that we need more information.
Right. But just note that every time we try to, be our own experts and say, well, if there weren't gas, then this would be cheaper. I mean, clearly, we're working with something that if it were cheaper, they would do it that way, right? And so
Right.
we're asking people, kind of what George said, ahead of when it's cost effective to do things. And that's part of the reason why we're going to need state incentives. And maybe for low income, we have to make sure that the incentives are in place, so that we still require it, but we know the incentives will cover it, right? And that's the piece to learn, is not whether it's cost effective, but rather, with low income, maybe it's just, just make sure the incentive is there to make sure that a new construction, low income, will have additional credits or additional something to cover that, right? And that's another way we go about it.
Yep, and the other residential exemption models the New York State law and climate plan is buildings greater than 3 stories.
Right.
I think that's, again, don't know, but I believe that's also based upon technology.
Yeah.
The other one then is,
Could we make it 4 stories?
Because then we're done.
Yeah.
Let's take out the stories altogether.
Aside from the MTA property.
I would bet that the differential is under 10%, right? I mean, rounding error, right?
and then historic buildings.
Define historic.
In our historic overlay, right?
Right, which, yeah.
Anything in the overlay? Or any
Any
building
building,
designated
any
as-
historic building, right, designated. Like your landmark buildings.
Yeah, so the state designation, or are we talking about our entire
No,
historic
I think
overlay?
your local designation.
So
I
we
would
need
defer- I would keep- I don't think I would do that right away. I mean, until we understand what major renovation is.
Yeah.
And if we
Right.
understand a major renovation, because if a building on Main Street gets gutted, even though it's historic, the inside, it's the outside that's historic, it's not the inside.
Yeah, our historic overlay, as I understand it, is entirely concerned with the outside of the building, and this law is entirely concerned with the inside of the building. So I wouldn't assume that those would line up.
And maybe then it's something you can build into the hardship exemption. That's
Yeah.
something that could be looked at.
Yeah, I think when we discuss the renovation, we may discover that historics are almost impossible, so maybe, in that exemption, we have language, but I don't know any of that yet, right? And I live in one of those. and
Has
who knows?
Craig House looked into this? I don't know if they've gotten that far along to have thought about how they're going to heat parts of their place. They just might have some insight, some expertise, to your point, Lee.
Yeah. I don't know, and they've only got the historic structure that they have to worry about, because they're going to raise
Right. The rest of it, they're going to build from
Yeah,
scratch.
build from
but-
scratch. So,
And the next question then is, when does the law go into effect? And that's number 5 on page 4. And look, I've thrown out some examples. Do you want it based on land use approvals? Do you want it based on building permits? State is at 2025, and the state does it very simple, right? It's easy, it's implementable, building permits. So if you apply for a building permit before January 1st, 2025, you don't have to comply if you apply for it afterwards. So that's an easy, for the public to understand, so I would suggest going with building permit issuance is the easiest. And question for the council is, what month, day, and year? Is it, I'll throw out, is it January 1st, 2024?
I'd be curious to know if there's a reason why we couldn't start it sooner. We would not want to do it retroactively, but I didn't know, to something you were saying, Dan, like how much do builders need to know beforehand?
Or architects.
Yeah,
at this-
architects,
Yeah.
Right, because before they work backwards from the building permit, they hire the architect, they do cost modeling, they get financial loans up in place.
Right, yeah.
Especially if they need to change the ventilation and where the air pump, the heat pumps go and all that stuff.
Right.
So a little time is probably warranted.
Yeah, I would say the minimum time they need, but I'm happy to grant whatever that time is.
this is an area where we lack the expertise to choose, and so we're going to need someone to give us a sense of what's reasonable. Maybe that's a Bruce.
I think so. I think the January 1st, 2024 seems to fall in line. It's 9 months approximately from when you would adopt the law. You're discussing, people are aware of it, but I'll discuss it with Bruce and get a sense from him.
I'm wondering, too, the planning board, their collective expertise might have some thoughts there.
Yeah, but to Ren's point, though, this would be the residential component first for
Yes.
new residential construction.
Yeah.
We'd have another date that we can stick in there for the next piece of the puzzle, which we could change even, right? Later if we discover we're wrong. But this is for the first tranche, right?
Yeah, I have a question about whether or not, for the best use of our time, is it good for us to put in whatever version of commercial we want now, before the state has even passed something, or should we wait to add it in once the state is farther along? And I don't have an answer to that, but it's a question I have.
That just reminded me of something I wanted to say earlier. Remember that, like, the state is working on the entire state, and we're just working on the city. So if we were to exempt hospitals, let's say we were going to exempt a few things, crematoriums and stuff. Basically what we're saying, like what Paloma said earlier, is we're saying that the businesses that we want to move here, the businesses that we want to move into the new and fully renovated commercial space, are businesses that do not burn fossil fuels for any reason, right? That's what we're saying. So they can't say that at the state level, right? Because someone's going to have to be, there's things that are going to have to happen in New York State somewhere. We have the luxury of saying not within these 5 miles, but New York State doesn't, so.
Yeah, I like the former, working toward it now so that we're already ahead. I feel like that's kind of the whole point of us being together on this.
Yeah, like I said, the thing that I'd be pretty comfortable doing is stating a date when we want to do commercial without knowing the details, because again, unless we're experts and the scientists and we know what the state has said, I don't think we can fill that out. Could we do something like that?
Yes.
Saying, announce a date.
Correct.
Put it into the statute without saying, and the legislation will come, and set a date when we have to get the legislation in place to be reasonable. Because then that would give us the time to rely on expertise and still kind of put our
Right.
line in the sand of, here's our date.
What do you have in mind when you're saying that about the scientists, Lee?
Well,
Can you give an example of what's?
all right, use your example. So I have someone in the Catskills who's gone to convection or induction.
Yeah.
Right? We don't know the cost structure. We don't know when it will make sense, and we certainly don't know for the industry whether, diners will take that. Will it blow up our, restaurant business?
Or
We don't
pizza
know.
parlors, I don't know what they're.
Remember, we're talking about new construction.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, when we do that, I don't know why the panel that has all the experts said commercial is this date, right? I'm okay to say, I think we can probably go earlier, partly because it's only our 5 square miles and whatever, but I don't know why they've made those choices. It might be because of the technology for heating, it might be the technology for cooking, I don't know, right? And I don't see how we're going to know.
I think it's a combination from reading, not all the report yet, but a lot of it, a couple of different factors. Having the workforce available and the skilled professionals who are trained in it is one thing that comes through in this report that's going to create jobs and new professions, and the skill's not there yet. The other is the financial incentives to make it worthwhile and feasible. And then the third is the technology. I think all three of those are what's driving the dates.
Then the fourth is electric capacity. So like with
Right.
the firehouse, we're having to get all new transformers to support the electrification of that firehouse. And those have I'm told those have a year lead time in ordering them. So if we have a delay with the firehouse, it's probably going to be related to that piece of it.
Yeah, I think of it too as a bit like what we've seen with electrifying our fleet of vehicles. There are some vehicles that have come and be made possible just in the last couple of years, and others that still aren't possible. So I would think that the same is being done with all the electrification of the stuff that's inside buildings as well. The technology, that there was money to be made, so people are working on it. But doesn't mean that things are all there yet. But there probably will be things a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now that are available, and therefore make it much more feasible for more businesses.
Then if you looked at it through a law that we wrote that had no exceptions, what that meant is if you wanted to build in Beacon and open that type of business, for 4 or 5 years you couldn't because it's not economically feasible, but then in 5 years when the technology is available, then you can move to Beacon. You can start a business in Beacon. So that by leaving out the exceptions, we're just saying that as fossil fuel replacements come online, you're welcome here. But for business, like glass blowing may not be a new business that could open in Beacon, but maybe when somebody does invent a way of doing glass blowing without
But
flame.
we may never get another pizza place again.
What's that?
We may never get another pizza place. It's
Maybe.
possible, yeah.
Well,
Well, at
the
least-
new pizza place I'm aware of that is going to be coming is a wood-fired oven, which would be fine under this law, my understanding.
And ironically,
Well, no,
more
wood
polluting
fired, it
than
would
gas.
Right.
The soot,
It would
the
be
soot
banned.
actually causes
Right.
Yeah,
both
it is,
heart
yes.
and lung issues.
In terms of air
you know.
quality, there's a difference in terms of fossil fuel, in terms of carbon impact, it's neutral.
Yes, but in terms of public health, it's harmful.
Sure.
That's actually a good question. Is this law, are fireplaces I know gas burning fireplaces are covered, but what about wood burning fireplaces? Would that be covered in the way that you write the law?
Haven't thought about that. We certainly,
It's an interesting one.
yeah, have not thought about it.
We did talk about wood and pellet stoves and
We
whether
did.
they would come under it, and they wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
So just be careful. You don't want to encourage more wood stoves in our, again, it's great if you're out in the woods, but when you're in a dense city in an area with air compliance issues already, it's not a great thing.
Or your living room?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the last category really is hardship exemptions. And I think with commercial, because it sounds, at least for now, the discussion seems to be centering around, let's get some more information, but it seems to be following the state's lead until we're not solidified yet, but that seems to be where the consensus seems to be going. So I don't think the hardship exemptions is really focused on commercial at this point. It really is residential, and so I don't know what hardships would come up other than if someone were to establish it's not technically or feasible or physically feasible due to the structure of the building, or financially feasible and may establish that. So I think those are three reasons we could put it in here, and the question becomes, who do you want to make that determination? Is it the ZBA? Is it the building inspector? Is it the city council that's going
Can
to
we?
be?
Yeah.
You could. My advice to you is,
Oh, I don't
No.
want to.
don't.
No.
And I would say on behalf of the building inspector, I don't want the building inspector trying to figure out the financial feasibility of.
Right. And that's something that the ZBA does have the expertise in, and they deal with in variances and the use variance.
Yeah. But-
I'd rather have more voices and minds on a subject rather than just individuals.
Well, so if we pick this issue up one kind of tranche at a time, if we take on new residential construction under four stories and under,
Yeah, there's no.
then there's no hardship.
Shouldn't be any.
And I would prefer that we have a law that has no hardship for that, because how are we going to get into that one, right? So if we want to do residential first, I would, new construction under 4 stories, I'd say none. And then we need to make sure that low income is addressed, and then we could do it, right? We said we would allow emergency and generator. We address the low income, and then we say no hardship.
Mixed use, though, what do you do? If you
So
put
we'd have to-
mixed
right,
use
yeah.
in this one, you're going to need the exemption. If you don't, then you may not
Yeah.
need the exemption.
So the first piece is clean, so we're saying now we have to think about what happens next with mixed use, right?
Well, the commercial part could have an exemption, or it's not applicable up until a certain date in the future. So
Yeah, but I'm
the
saying-
residential part would be,
Right, but I think of the commercial, because we need more information, and we don't want to slow down the residential portion, you put the commercial in there with a date, so you have a bare bones law, and we don't need to get into the nitty-gritty with exemptions and specific regulations, because that can be dealt with as we get closer to learning more information and before it gets implemented in the 2028.
So mixed use, what you might be able to do is say that the residential portion of mixed use applies to our new residential construction, and the only exception would be if you could demonstrate that because it's mixed use, something doesn't work right. Maybe that, and that would pick up mixed use in the first tranche.
That would be in planning.
Yeah, something like that.
I think this would be a good thing for Bruce, too. And we're really piling on Bruce in this meeting, but
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what he has to say about that, too, about the mixed use.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't
Because he's
think-
going to think about zones, and he's going to think about it in a different way than we are.
Yeah, I just want to remind you, Bruce has been here less than 3 months and is used to working in a very different municipality.
He's not an expert, too?
I would just say you have experts, like you have this whole group of really smart people that design the climate law. Take one of them
Yeah,
down.
I
They know a
agree.
lot more than
Yeah.
Bruce
I
about
agree.
it.
So I have enough from this discussion to draft a law that will give us something to talk about. I know the question is to go back to see if we can get a representative from the Climate Action Council and/or NYSERDA, and so we can advance the discussion. I think this has been a good exercise. It's raised some questions and things we need to get further research on, but I have enough to bring back to you in 2 weeks, the skeleton of the law, and advance it from there.
Cool.
Thank you.
Everybody all right?
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks for
That's
setting up a
really
good
rich,
conversation.
very rich and very kind of still high-level discussion. That's really good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, good points.
All right, thank you all. And now for the mundane.
Don't, this is Pete's contract.
Excuse me.
Pete, it's okay, you're okay.
He's going to cut off your mic.
We don't think you're mundane.
So, next item is the agreement with Video Ventures Limited for 2023-2024 video services. Chris?
So this is to bring to you an agreement that is for 2 years for Video Ventures, which is our current firm that does videoing, televising, and webcast meetings for the city council. It is for $25,200 a year, and they cover all city council meetings, the planning board meeting, and the ZBA. And this also has in it funding for them doing the YouTube videos that we have, and then also there's $25,000 for discretionary things, like if we do the video on composting again, or on recycling, or on the plant, there's a little bit in there. So we've had a great experience with Pete and his firm, and this is already budgeted, and we just need to do a contract. So we'd love to bring that to you next week, and you have a copy of that contract in your packet.
Great.
Cool.
Everybody good? You don't want to bid it out?
No way.
Don't. Pete's going to cut your mic. Do you know what a deal
or make
we?
it live
Do you know
and
what
we
a
don't
deal we
notice.
get? He has not raised his fees in
I'm only
years.
kidding.
I see some photoshopping coming in.
Yeah, that's
Oh my gosh.
Pete is awesome. Next, Flock Group agreement for Flock safety cameras. Tell us what those are, Chris.
All right, a Flock safety camera is a license plate reader, and we talked about these when we did the 2023 operating budget. They're in the detective's budget. This agreement is for installation of four cameras at the 4 entry points to the city, and then for hardware, software, and tech support. This amount is for 2 years. So we're going to we would try this out for 2 years. It gives us a 60-day option to cancel. I know that some of you have asked previously about how long we keep that data. There's a rolling deletion of all data on a 30-day basis. So unless we have some circumstance that causes us to download that, the data is gone after 30 days.
Is that good for the detectives?
Yeah, that's fine. We usually know, like, the last times we've used this were with major crimes where we're within a day going to other entities that have these cameras and asking what they have. Like, we often will go to the Bridge Authority for their cameras. We've gone, I think, once to Cold Spring. So within 24 to 48 hours, we know we're needing to know who's coming out, in and out, yeah.
Well, I think we talked before about there's no facial recognition, it's just looking at the license.
That's
number,
right. Yep. Yeah, it would be a lot more money to do that, and I wouldn't spend that money.
Okay, good. All right, next one's designating the POJO as the paper of record, and it's the Poughkeepsie Journal because the law requires a daily paper of record.
Correct. That's for notice of bids, public hearing notices for planning board meetings, city budget, items of that nature.
For those of you who have been here before, I've proposed the London Times, but we've ended up
I
with
thought
the
it was,
Poughkeepsie Journal.
it was the Manchester Guardian you suggested, I think.
Oh,
before.
yeah, okay, good.
And I think I seconded that, but.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that we do also send at least relevant information to our local papers. Obviously, they are not our paper of record, but we share the same information.
Planning board notices have to go in a local paper in addition to our paper of record.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
We just don't have to approve that every year as part of state law.
Right.
Right. Yep, you can go above and beyond what you do, but this is the minimum, and that does need to be approved.
But there's a few things where we have to do a second paper, so we do the Beacon Free Press.
Correct, yes. Like a
Yes.
bond issuance, I think, might be a second.
Yeah, it's a small number of things. Like when I see the bills, I wonder what they are. And okay.
Everyone good? All right. Next one is authorizing the city administrator's approval for certain expenditures.
Yeah, so the city has done this in the past. You did it last year when you approved the budget. This year, we did not. And so basically, if the city approves contract like our legal bills, you've approved us, you've authorized us, you have a retention agreement, the administrator can pay those bills. If, however, the light fixture needs to be replaced, the generator goes down, or a piece of electric equipment needs to be done, that's not specifically within the budget, so the administrator has a line item for repairs that he can use, but he doesn't have the authority on the way the charter is written. So this local law allows the administrator to administer the budget in accordance with the items where you've appropriated funds, and we set forth here dollar amounts of that. And it's into three categories: general commodities, paper towels, light bulbs, things of that nature, up to $20,000. Above $20,000, state law says we have to come to you for bids, like computers, for example. The other would be contract for services for labor and construction exceeding $35,000 would go to you, to the council. Under $35,000, the administrator has the authority to pay for that out of the approved budgeted items. So street repair has to be patched immediately. He has the authority to go in compliance with your procurement policy, which requires you get at least, if it's, say, $20,000, you'd have to get 3 quotes from that. So it's not as though we can just go to one person. There's a whole procurement policy that you previously approved that applies here. And then the third is just an example of a catch-all, that something doesn't fall within those 2 categories, so long as it's consistent with the appropriation policy, which requires them to get quotes in an amount for $20,000. So this just creates that sort of safety valve in case the state controller comes down and does an audit, to establish that the city administrator has the authority from the council to approve those purchases. A little bit of housekeeping, if you will.
Yeah, we actually put this in the budget we put this in the budget resolution when we passed the 2022 budget. We
Right.
forgot to put it in the 2023. And then we had small contracts coming up, and it was like, oops, I don't have the authority to sign these.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. How has this come up in the last year? But it sounds like it's only
Yeah,
just started coming up this year.
I wrote down a couple examples because I thought it's always good to have an example. So on the services, like we have an HVAC contract for the highway garage that's $16,000. And rather than bring that to you, I would be fully able to sign that because we complied with our procurement, and then it's under $20,000 and it's budgeted. On construction, public works projects, if we do additional striping, for instance, like let's say we've talked about doing diagonal striping on Henry Place, and I go and get a cost estimate for $4,000, rather than having to bring that here, we could do that. And then the final category, I was thinking of professional fees, because we're doing survey work, and oftentimes that's just a few $1,000s. We have it in the line for the engineer, but I actually have to sign a contract for them to do the work. And then any major, anything that's bid comes to you because you award the bid. This is mainly for things that are pretty de minimis.
And you're not approving these in a vacuum. The purchase orders are typically filled out by the department heads.
Yes.
Director of Finance, Susan Tucker, reviews it. Ultimately, the final approval signature is from the city administrator. So it goes through a number of steps. You're just granting the city administrator the authority to administer these.
Right, and those steps are pursuant to the procurement policy.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is
And
audited.
Susan tells them when they can't do it.
She's not shy.
No, she's not.
And I did email to the council tonight a copy of our procurement policy. When you get a chance to look at the email, New York State law says you need to review it. You reviewed it, vetted it last year, so just sending it to you, and if you have any questions, let us know, but other than, if you're fine with it, you've completed your review, and that's sufficient to comply with the law.
And when we do the future budgets, we'll try to remember to put this in there. It's on my list.
So that'll
If
be-
we didn't do this, you'd have a rough year with the fire station. Everything you need to buy over 25.
Or your council agendas might be packed.
Yeah,
with lots of
you're just going to be
resolutions.
here till like 2 o'clock in the morning, like about every little.
Yeah, rivet.
Each individual light bulb, I think, needs its own
And by the way,
resolution.
going back to the video, if they're over 4-hour meetings, Pete gets an extra $100. And we've only had to do that for the planning board.
Questions? Further? Okay. Last one, I can't even say what MTR stands for. Matter of, there we go.
Yes.
Yep, this is a tax cert, so it's a matter of. So there's a tax cert settlement, and that's Nick.
So this is the tax cert settlement for the hydroelectric facility commonly known as the Groveville Hydroelectric Facility, located at 10 Front Street. ENL of North America is the owner and operator, and they challenged their tax assessment for years 2021 and 2022. The State Office of Real Property Services provides an appraisal that's how Kathy derived at her amount at $780,000, right? And they challenged it. They provided some proof and documentation with some questions where they disputed the appraisal from the state. And through some discussions and settlement conferences with the court through Judge Brands, a negotiated settlement was reached. The $625,000 revised assessment is higher than what it's been in prior years when they had challenged it back in 2019 when it was about $440,000. So this would reduce the assessment in each of the 2 years from $780,000 to $620,000, resulting in a city refund of taxes of $3,172, county refund of about $1,100, school refund of about $5,700, and library tax refund of $170. And so it's a recommendation from our office as well as from Kathy Martin that this resolution be accepted.
And I talked to Kathy a little bit about this. They were assessed lower than this at, I think,
440 or
440.
Yes.
And she raised it because the state gave an assessed value. And apparently what happened is they do it based on net revenue.
It's an income-producing property.
And they had missed some number in the whole calculation. So they gave us too high a number. And then Kathy was able to work out, along with Judd from Keenan Bean, the 625 could have gone lower. Like if we had gone to court, we could go back to the 440. So we figured, go with what we got here.
Right, and this is higher than the amount that they had been arguing.
Oh,
Right.
absolutely.
Yes.
How come in this resolution it only talks about the money that is owed that we owe, the 3,000? You just
I did provide you with the
provide
others,
with other
yes.
numbers, but this is only because this comes directly from the
Well,
city.
Correct, yes.
Okay. But
And the county and the school district will also be,
Right, so the school district has to we distribute the money, or the school district distributes the money?
each tax entity distributes their own refund.
I see, okay.
And there are certain classes of property that the assessor doesn't assess. This is one of those. Dams,
Yes.
railroad lines, utility
Utility.
Electric.
lines.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is one of those. That's why the state agency did the assessment.
Right.
Right. Okay? We good?
Yep.
Do we need a motion to adjourn?
We do.
No.
I'm looking for one.
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thanks.